Now, I want you to close your eyes and let the warmth of your room fade away, just for a moment, as we drift back through the fog of time to a Saturday evening in early March 1888. It is a time of transition, a season that feels as though it is caught between the dying embers of winter and the hesitant, shivering first breaths of spring. You are standing on the edge of Manhattan, perhaps near the South Street seaport, where the air smells of wet hemp, salt-crusted timber, and the lingering, smoky aroma of coal fires that burn in every hearth across the island. The sky is a heavy, bruised purple, the kind of color that settles over the city when the atmosphere is thick with moisture, promising a gentle rain to wash away the last of the soot-stained slush from the gutters. No one suspects what is coming. No one feels the shift in the deep currents of the Atlantic, or the way the pressure is dropping, far out at sea, like a heart slowing its beat before a great shock. You see the city as it was then, a place of texture and sound that we have long since forgotten. There's the rhythmic clatter of horse hooves on cobblestones, a sound that is both sharp and hollow, echoing off the brick facades of the warehouses. There is the low, mournful lowing of the foghorns from the ships in the harbor, vessels that have traveled from Liverpool and Le Havre, now resting their weary hulls in the dark waters of the East River. You watch the lamplighter moving with a slow, practiced grace, his pole reaching up to wake the gaslights, which flicker into a soft, amber glow that barely pushes back the gathering gloom. It is a comfortable world, a world of iron and steam, a world that believes it has finally conquered the wild whims of nature through the sheer force of its industry. But if you look closely at the animals, the stray cats darting under the piers, or the horses tossing their manes with a nervous, unsettled energy, you might notice a change. The air has grown unnaturally still. It is a heavy silence, the kind that presses against your eardrums, making the world feel small and intimate. You pull your wool coat tighter around your shoulders, feeling the dampness of the salt spray, and you listen to the whispers of the sailors who have just come ashore. They speak of a cold front descending from the north, a clipper they call it, but they say it with a shrug, for New Yorkers are used to the wind. They do not know that from the south, a warm, moist beast of a storm is crawling up the coast, fed by the Gulf Stream, and that these two giants, the Arctic cold and the tropical wet, are destined to collide directly over the intersection of Broadway and Wall Street. You walk through the streets of the lower wards, where the tenement windows are already glowing with the soft, yellow light of oil lamps. You can smell the dinners being prepared, cabbage, salted pork, and the sweet scent of baking bread, wafting out into the cool evening. It feels like any other Saturday. The theaters on 14th Street are filling up, the actors are applying their grease paint, and the newsboys are shouting the final headlines of the day, their voices thin and reedy in the damp air. They are talking about the upcoming elections, the price of coal, and the gossip of the Gilded Age mansions further uptown. There's a sense of permanence here, an unspoken belief that the great masonry buildings and the vast networks of telegraph wires are invincible. But the barometer in the window of the maritime shop you just passed is falling with a terrifying speed that the shopkeeper hasn't noticed yet because he is busy closing his shutters for the night. You hear the click of the lock, a sound that seems strangely final, as the clock towers across the city begin to chime the hour. The bells sounding muffled and distant through the thickening mist, the first few flakes of rain begin to fall. They are large, fat drops, turning the dust of the streets into a slick, dark mire. You watch them splash against the polished brass of a passing carriage, reflecting the dim light of the street lamps like tiny, shattered mirrors. Soon, the rain begins to turn to sleet, a sharp, stinging grit that rattles against the window panes like handfuls of sand. You can hear it hitting the silk of the umbrellas held by the ladies rushing home, a soft pitter-patter that gradually turns into a harsher tick-tick-tick. The temperature is beginning its long, slow slide. It is a subtle theft of warmth, one that you don't notice at first, until you realize that your breath is now visible, a ghostly plume of white that vanishes into the gray. The wind, which had been a mere sigh, begins to find its voice. It moans through the rigging of the ships, a low, haunting vibrato that sounds like a choir of the drowned. You stand there, a lone observer in this twilight hour, watching the transition from a wet spring evening into something far more sinister. As you move further into the city, toward the heart of the shopping districts, the bustle is starting to fade. The shopgirls are wrapping their scarves tightly around their necks, their faces flushed with the cold, as they hurry toward the elevated trains. The L, that great iron serpent that weaves through the city's second stories, is still running, its engines belching black smoke and sparks into the darkening sky. You can hear the roar of the trains overhead, a mechanical thunder that usually feels so reassuring, so modern. But tonight, the sound seems brittle. The iron rails are beginning to contract in the cold, and the grease on the wheels is thickening. You find yourself standing beneath the great bridge, the Brooklyn Bridge, which has only been open for 5 years. It is the pride of the century, a web of steel and stone that connects the two great cities. In the mist, the towers seem to float, disconnected from the earth, reaching up into a sky that has now turned a deep, ominous charcoal. The cables are singing. It is a sound you have to strain to hear at first, but once you catch it, it haunts you, a high, metallic hum, vibrating with the tension of the wind. It is the sound of the bridge bracing itself. You look out over the water, where the whitecaps are beginning to foam, and you see the lights of the ferry boats tossing and turning in the swell. The captains are struggling to see through the sleet, their lanterns swinging wildly, casting long, frantic shadows across the churning surface of the river. By 10 o'clock, the transformation is nearly complete. The sleet has turned to a fine, dry snow, the kind that doesn't melt when it hits the ground, but instead begins to pile up in the crevices of the cobblestones. It is a silent arrival. Unlike the rain, which announces itself with a splash, this snow simply occupies the space, layer by layer, breath by breath. You watch it settle on the brim of a discarded hat, on the manes of the horses waiting patiently by the curbs, and on the shoulders of the night watchman. The city is being draped in a white sheet, as if it were a piece of furniture in a house being closed up for the season. You find a small tavern, its windows frosted over with the condensation of a dozen warm bodies inside. You push open the heavy oak door, and for a moment, the world is right again. There is the smell of sawdust and stale ale, the sound of low murmurs and the clink of glass. The men inside are talking about the cold, rubbing their hands together over a pot-bellied stove that glows a dull, comforting red. They laugh about the dusting of snow, joking that they'll have to shovel their walkways in the morning before heading to church. You sit in the corner, watching the frost patterns grow on the glass, delicate and intricate, like frozen ferns. You know, with a strange, quiet certainty, that these men will not be going to church tomorrow. They will not be going anyway. Outside, the wind is no longer moaning. It is beginning to howl. It finds the gaps in the door frames and the cracks in the window seals, whistling a sharp, discordant tune. The snow is no longer falling straight down. It is moving horizontally, a blur of white that erases the building across the street. You watch through the small patch of clear glass as the last carriage of the night struggles past. The driver huddled so low he is almost invisible, the horse's head bowed against the stinging spray. The street lights are becoming dim orbs, struggling to stay lit as the wind tries to snatch their flames away. This is the threshold. This is the moment before the history books take over, before the statistics of inches and lives lost begin to be tallied. This is the sensory reality of a world about to be buried. You feel the vibration of the building as a particularly strong gust hits, a reminder that even these great structures are merely shells. You think of the miles of telegraph wires, the naval system of the 19th century, already beginning to sag under the weight of the ice. You think of the thousands of people currently sleeping in their beds, dreaming of spring, unaware that the world they wake up to will be unrecognizable. The tavern keeper begins to turn down the lamps, signaling the end of the night. One by one, patrons wrap themselves in their heavy coats and disappear into the white wall outside. Their voices are instantly swallowed by the wind. You follow them, stepping back out into the night, and the cold hits you like a physical blow. It is a dry, searing cold that catches in your throat. The ground is already several inches deep in a fine, powdery snow that swirls around your boots like smoke. The city feels cavernous and empty, a ghost of itself. You walk toward your lodgings, guided more by memory than by sight. Every familiar landmark has been altered. The statues in the park are hooded in white, their features blurred into anonymous shapes. The iron fences are encrusted with rime. You hear a sharp crack, the sound of a tree limb giving way under the weight, a sudden, violent sound in the muffled landscape. You realize then that the city is not just being covered, it is being overwhelmed. The technology of 1888, the gas, the steam, the telegraph, is being systematically dismantled by a force that doesn't care for progress. As you reach your door and turn the key, you look back one last time at the street. The lights of the city are failing. One by one, the gas lamps are being extinguished by the gale, leaving only the white, reflected light of the snow to guide the way. It is a world of shadows and ice. You step inside, the heavy door thudding shut behind you, cutting off the roar of the wind, but you can still feel it, a low vibration in the floorboards, a reminder that the storm is only just beginning its 3-day reign. You climb the stairs in the deck, the wooden steps creaking under your weight, and as you settle into your bed, listening to the rattling of the window panes, you realize that the New York you knew this afternoon is gone. In its place, a white wilderness is rising, silent and hungry, waiting for the sun that will not truly shine for 72 hours. You fall into a fitful sleep, the sound of the wind transformed in your dreams into the crashing of waves on a distant, frozen shore. You are no longer in a city. You are on an island in the middle of a white sea, and the tide is coming in. The great white hurricane has arrived, and by morning, the world will be a different shape entirely. You dream of the silence, a silence so deep it feels like the end of time, and in that dream, you see the city buried up to its eaves, a kingdom of frost where the only sound is the heartbeat of the storm. You return inside, shivering violently, and move your chair closer to the stove. The quiet of the house is now punctuated by the rhythmic thud of the wind hitting the walls. You think about the food in your larder. How long will it last? The bakeries are closed. The milk wagons are buried. The city's supply chain, which relied on the constant movement of horses and trains, has been severed. You realize that for the first time in your life, you are facing the possibility of true hunger in the middle of a metropolis. It is a humbling thought. We like to think of ourselves as masters of our environment, but as you watch the snow climb another inch up your window pane, you understand that nature is merely allowing us to live here on sufferance. As the afternoon light begins to fail, though it was never truly light to begin with, the atmosphere in the city turns toward a quiet, desperate folklore. People are starting to do the unthinkable. In some parts of the city, men are venturing out of their second-story windows, stepping directly onto the drifts to walk across the street. They move like ghosts, their feet sinking deep into the powder. Some carry lanterns that cast long, swaying shadows across the white mounds. You watch one man try to cross the street. He disappears into a soft spot in the drift, sinking up to his waist, then his chest. He struggles, his movements panicked, until he manages to grab hold of a wrought iron fence buried beneath the surface. He pulls himself out, gasping, his face a mask of terror. The snow is a trap, a beautiful, deceptive landscape that can swallow a man whole. You hear the bells of a distant church, tolling for the afternoon service that will never happen. The sound is eerie, coming and going with the gusts of wind, like a funeral dirge for the city. You imagine the pews empty, the altar covered in a fine dusting of snow that has found its way through the roof tiles. The sacred and the profane are both being buried today. Down in the Bowery, the gambling dens and the saloons are quiet, the neon signs of gas and glass dark and cold. Uptown, the opera houses are silent, the velvet curtains heavy with the dampness of the air. In the late afternoon, a strange phenomenon occurs. For a brief moment, the wind dies down to a whisper, and the swirling snow settles. The world becomes perfectly, terrifyingly clay. You see the street as a white canyon. Abandoned carriages sit like humped ghosts in the middle of the road, their horses long gone or buried where they stood. The telegraph poles are leaning at impossible angles, their wires tangled like black spiderwebs against the white. And then, as quickly as it stopped, the wind returns with a scream, and the world vanishes again. It was a glimpse into the heart of the storm, a reminder that the blizzard is a living, breathing thing. You spend the evening by the light of a single candle, trying to read a book of poetry to keep the encroaching gloom at bay. But your eyes keep drifting back to the window. You think about the ice bridge forming on the river, of the brave and the foolish who might try to cross it. You think about the ships at sea, tossed like toys in the Atlantic, their crews blinded by the spray. And you think about the silence. It is a silence that feels historical. You are living through a moment that people will talk about for 100 years. Yet in this moment, you feel only cold, tired, and very, very small. The temperature continues to drop. The coal in your bucket is running low, and you know you must conserve it. You blow out the candle, the smell of the tallow lingering in the air, and crawl into bed with all your clothes on, including your coat and hat. You listen to the house shiver. The wind is searching for you, poking its icy fingers through the cracks in the floorboards and the gaps in the window frames. You pull the heavy quilts over your head, creating a small, warm cave of your own breath. Outside, the great white hurricane is just getting started. The first day is over, but the white wall remains, and the sun is a forgotten myth. As you drift into a cold, shallow sleep, you hear the distant sound of a whistle, a steam engine, perhaps, trying one last time to break through the drifts. The sound is lonely and defiant, a small cry of humanity against the overwhelming power of the frost. It fades away, leaving only the roar of the wind and the soft, relentless hiss of the snow against the glass. You are alone in the white, a part of a city that has become a wilderness, waiting for a morning that feels as though it may never come. The second morning arrives not with a sunrise, but with a slight thinning of the oppressive gray veil. It is Monday, March 12th, a day that should have been the start of a busy work week, the beginning of the city's rhythmic pulse, but instead, the silence has deepened. You wake to find that the frost inside your room has grown thicker. It has crept along the iron bed frame, a delicate and deadly lace. The water in the basin by your washstand is a solid block of ice, cracked across the middle like a shattered mirror. You realize now that the city's heart isn't just obscured. It is beginning to freeze solid. The great white hurricane has moved beyond a Mayweather event. It has become a siege. You manage to scrape a larger hole in the window ice, and the sight that greets you is one of pure, surrealist horror. The elevated train tracks, those proud iron arteries of Manhattan, are no longer black steel. They are white ridges, unrecognizable save for their height above the street. And there, trapped between the stations at 14th and 18th Streets, sits an L train, It is a ghost ship of the sky. The engine is cold, its brass fittings dull and encrusted with rime. The passenger cars, made of wood and glass, are half buried in the snow that has drifted up from the street to meet the tracks. You can see the faces of people pressed against the glass. Pale, frightened blurs. They have been there all night. Some have tried to climb down the iron pillars, risking a fall into the 30-foot drifts below, while others sit in a state of catatonic shock, wrapped in their Sunday finery that was never meant for an Arctic survival. You feel a surge of restless energy, born of the cabin fever that is beginning to settle into your bones. You must see the city. You must know if the world still exists beyond your four walls. You dress in every layer you own. 3 pairs of wool stockings, 2 trousers, a heavy waistcoat, and your thickest pilot coat. You tie a silk scarf around your face, leaving only a slit for your eyes, and you prepare to breach the wall of snow at your door. Opening the door is an act of violence. You have to shoulder into the drift, the snow spilling into your hallway like white sand. You begin to climb. You aren't walking on the street anymore. You are ascending a mountain range that has been grafted onto the city. Stepping out onto the top of a drift, you find yourself at eye level with the first-story shop signs. You are standing on 10 feet of packed, treacherous ice. The wind has not stopped. It has merely settled into a steady, punishing gale that feels like a physical weight against your chest. You look down the avenue, and the scale of the disaster finally hits you. New York, the pinnacle of 19th century ambition, looks like a ruin from a lost civilization. There are no sounds of industry. There are no whistles. There is only the thrum of the wind through the remaining telegraph wires, a sound like a giant harp being played by a madman. You begin to move, your boots sinking 6 inches with every step into the crust. You pass a bakery where the owner has managed to dig a tunnel from his front door to the middle of the street. It is a dark, rib-caged corridor of blue-tinted ice. You see people huddled at the mouth of the tunnel, trading coins for day-old loaves, their hands shaking as they reach for the bread. Money has lost its meaning. A gold eagle is worth less than a warm roll and a cup of black coffee. You hear a rumor passed from person to person, a whisper in the white, that the fires have started. In the tenements, where people are desperate for heat, they are burning their furniture. Chairs, tables, even floorboards are being fed into the small stoves. You look toward the horizon and see a smudge of dark smoke rising against the gray sky. It is a terrifying sight. In this wind, a single spark could turn the frozen city into a funeral pyre, and no fire engine in the world could reach the flames. You push on toward the rail yards, drawn by a morbid curiosity. The iron horse, the symbol of the era's power, has been humbled. You see a massive steam locomotive, a beast of 10,000 pounds, buried up to its bell and adrift. It looks like a beached whale, its steam long since hissed away into the cold air. A crew of men with shovels is working around it, but they look like ants trying to move a mountain. They are frostbitten, their skin a waxy white, their movements slow and heavy. One man tells you that the drifts up the Hudson are 30 feet deep and a mile long. The trains from Chicago, from Boston, from Washington, they are all gone, stalled in the wilderness of the Bronx or the plains of New Jersey. New York is no longer a hub. It is an island in every sense of the word, cut off from the grain of the West and the cold of the South. As you wonder, you see the humanity of the storm. You see a group of men trying to rescue a horse that has fallen in a drift. The poor animal is exhausted, its eyes wide with a prehistoric terror. They are trying to slide a canvas sling under its belly, but the wind keeps whipping the fabric away. You see a woman standing on her balcony, lowering a basket on a rope to a man below. She is giving him a blanket, a simple act of mercy in a world that has turned merciless. But you also see the shadows. You see the looters, dark shapes moving through the haze, taking advantage of the fact that the police are as trapped as everyone else. They disappear into the snow like spirits, carrying bundles of stolen goods. By mid-afternoon, the temperature takes another plunge. The air feels brittle, as if it might shatter if you struck it. You find yourself near the docks again, and you witness the impossible. The East River, the churning, tidal strait, is beginning to clog with lully ice, thick, slushy pans that are freezing together into a solid mass. You see a few daring souls, driven by a strange New York brand of bravado, stepping out onto the ice. They are testing it with their canes. They want to walk to Brooklyn. You watch as a man in a top hat makes it halfway across before a crack opens up, a black line of water appearing like a snake in the white. He leaps back, his face pale, as the ice floe he was standing on begins to spin away into the current. The ice bridge is a siren's song, beautiful and lethal. The sensory details of this day are what stay with you. The smell is no longer of the city. It is the smell of ozone and frozen salt. The sound is the constant crick-crack of the ice shifting against the buildings. The light is a flat, shadowless gray that makes it impossible to judge distance or depth. You find yourself stumbling, your depth perception failing, as you wander through a landscape with no landmarks. The street lamps are hooded in snow, looking like giant mushrooms. The statues of George Washington and Union generals are unrecognizable mounds of white, their iron swords transformed into icicles. You decide you must return home before the light fails completely. The walk back is a struggle against your own fading strength. Your toes have gone numb, a dangerous sign you recognize from the stories of old-timers. Every breath is a chore. You pass a telegraph office, and the sight is heartbreaking. A line of people stands outside, hoping for a connection that doesn't exist. They want to tell their families they are alive. They want to know if the world beyond the snow still stands. But the wires are down, and the lightning of the telegraph has been grounded by the ice. The silence of the wires is perhaps the most frightening thing of all to a Victorian mind. It is the silence of a severed nerve. When you finally reach your stoop, you find that the tunnel you dug has been partially filled in. You have to crawl the last few feet on your hands and knees, the snow finding its way into your sleeves and down your neck. Inside, the house feels like a tomb. You manage to coax a tiny flame into the stove using the last of your kindling and a few old newspapers. You sit there, watching the headlines about spring fashions and the coming heat turn to ash. You think about the city tonight. You think about the great white hurricane as a physical presence, a white beast crouched over the rooftops, breathing ice into every chimney. You realize that tonight will be the hardest. The initial excitement of the storm has worn off, replaced by the grim reality of survival. The coal is running out. The food is low. The cold is relentless. You wrap yourself in your quilts, listening to the wind howl with a renewed fury, and you realize that New York has been stripped of its vanity. It is no longer the greatest city in the world. It is just a collection of cold, shivering people, waiting for a dawn that feels like a miracle they no longer deserve. The night is long, filled with the sounds of the city breaking. You hear the distant collapse of a roof, the sound muffled by the snow but still heavy with the weight of disaster. You hear the cries of a stray dog, a lonely, high-pitched keening that eventually fades into nothing. You sleep in fits and starts, dreaming of green fields and the sound of rain, real rain, soft and warm. But when you wake in the middle of the night, the only sound is the hiss of the snow against the glass, the heartbeat of the ice, and the knowledge that tomorrow, the city will have to find a way to breathe again, or it will be lost to the white forever. Tuesday, March 13th, dawns with a sky the color of a tarnished silver spoon. The wind has finally begun to lose its sharp, murderous edge, shifting from a roar to a persistent, rhythmic moan. But the cold has deepened into something brittle and absolute. You wake to find that the very air in your room feels heavy, as if the oxygen itself has been slowed by the frost. Your breath doesn't just plume. It seems to hang in the air like a solid object. This is the third day of the paralysis, the day when the city's desperation begins to transform into a strange, communal resolve. New York is a place of individuals, of strivers and loners, but the great white hurricane has done the impossible. It has forced a million strangers to look at one another and see their own reflection in the ice. You venture out once more, your movements stiff and mechanical. The world you step into is even more alien than it was yesterday. The snow has settled and packed, turning the soft drifts into a hard, undulating landscape of sculpted marble. You find that you can walk on top of the drifts now without sinking to your waist. The surface is frozen into a crust so thick it can support the weight of a man, provided he moves with the grace of a tightrope walker. You are walking 10 feet above the cobblestones, level with the ornate cornices of the brownstones and the second-story windows of the tailors and the clockmakers. You look into these windows as you pass, catching glimpses of lives interrupted, a family huddled around a single candle, a man pacing a small circle in his parlor, the frost on the glass framing them like portraits from a forgotten era. The most incredible news, whispered from the mouths of those you pass, draws you toward the waterfront. They are talking about the ice bridge. It is a phenomenon that hasn't been seen in generations, and perhaps will never be seen again. The East River, the treacherous, churning artery of salt water, has finally surrendered. The massive ice floes that were swirling yesterday have jammed together between the piers of Manhattan and the shores of Brooklyn, freezing solid into a jagged, white causeway. You reach the docks and see it for yourself, a chaotic, beautiful bridge of ice, spanning the distance where the ferries usually churn. A crowd has gathered at the water's edge. There's a palpable tension in the air, a mix of Victorian curiosity and raw, shivering necessity. You watch as a group of men, perhaps 20 of them, begin to make their way across. They move like ants across a giant, broken mirror. Among them are businessmen in heavy overcoats, laborious with burlap sacks wrapped around their feet, and even a few adventurous youths who seem to treat the life-threatening crossing as a day. You see them leaping from one jagged ridge of ice to the next, their arms outstretched for balance. Beneath that ice, the tide is still moving, a dark and powerful force that could pull the entire bridge apart in a heartbeat. But for now, the frost holds. It is a moment of pure, desperate magic. The two great cities, Manhattan and Brooklyn, physically united by the very element that sought to destroy them. You spend an hour watching the crossing, captivated by the silence of the river. Usually, this place is a cacophony of steam whistles, the shouting of stevedores, and the churning of paddle wheels. Now, there's only the occasional groan of the ice, a deep, resonant sound that vibrates in your very teeth. It is the sound of the earth shifting. You see a man reach the Brooklyn side and turn back to wave his hat. A thin, tattered cheer goes up from the Manhattan shore. It is a small victory, a tiny act of defiance against the hurricane. But the river is a fickle god. You notice a small lead of black water opening up near the center of the span, a reminder that this path is temporary, a fleeting gift of the cold. Leaving the river behind, you head toward the center of the city, toward the great thoroughfares of Broadway and Fifth Avenue. Hey, the scale of the labor is staggering. Thousands of men have been hired by the city, or have simply taken up tools out of necessity, to begin the Great Dig. They are not just clearing paths, they are carving a new geography. You see trenches 10 feet deep. The walls are straight and clean as if they had been cut from stone. In some places, the snow is so high that the workers have dug tunnels beneath the drifts, creating a subterranean world lit by lanterns and the pale glow of the sun through the ice overhead. You walk through one of these tunnels, The light inside is a surreal, ethereal blue. The sound of the wind is replaced by the muffled thump of shovels and the low murmurs of men working in the dark. It feels as though you have entered a cathedral of ice. You pass a man leaning against the snow wall, his face smeared with soot to protect his eyes from the glare of the white outside. He offers you a nod, a silent acknowledgement of the shared ordeal. There is no talk of class here, no distinction between the millionaire and the immigrant. Both are cold, both are hungry, both are small in the face of the storm. The hunger is becoming the primary concern. You see a queue forming outside a grocery store that has managed to open its upper half door. The shelves are nearly bare. There is no milk, no fresh meat, no eggs. People are buying bags of dried beans, hardtack, and jars of preserved fruit as if they were jewels. You see a wealthy woman in a fur-lined cloak standing in line behind a dock worker, both of them clutching their coins with the same white-knuckled intensity. The city's vaunted infrastructure, its steamships and rail lines, has failed, and New York has reverted to a frontier town, a place where survival depends on what you have stored in your cellar. The sensory landscape of this third day is one of transition. The blinding white of the first 48 hours is being stained by the soot of 1,000 coal fires. The snow is turning gray, then black, in the areas where the dig is most intense. The smell of the city is returning, the smell of horse manure, coal smoke, and unwashed bodies. But it is muted, held down by the weight of the cold. The sound is the most striking change. The silence is being broken by the rhythmic clink-clink-clink of pickaxes hitting the frozen ground and the occasional, thunderous collapse of a snowbank as a tunnel gives way. As the afternoon light begins to wane, you find yourself near a small park. The trees are encased in ice, their branches drooping like the crystal arms of a chandelier. Every movement of the wind causes them to rattle against one another, a delicate, musical sound that contrasts sharply with the grim labor of the streets. You sit for a moment on the top of a buried park bench, your feet dangling above the hidden grass. You think about the sheer volume of water that is currently suspended over the city in the form of ice. When this melts, and it must melt eventually, where will it all go? The thought of the coming flood is a shadow in the back of your mind. But for now, the frost is still king. You see a group of children who have emerged from a nearby tenement. They are not afraid, they are delighted. To them, the city has been turned into a giant playground. They are sliding down the massive drifts on pieces of scrap wood, their laughter ringing out in the cold air. It is a jarring, beautiful sound. It reminds you that life, in all its messy, resilient glory, cannot be suppressed for long. Even as the adults worry about coal and the price of flour, the children are reclaiming the streets from the storm. But the tragedy is never far away. You pass a doorway where a group of men are carrying out a long, heavy bundle wrapped in a gray blanket. They move with a somber, practiced slowness. There is no carriage to take the body away, no way to reach the cemetery. They carry the bundle toward a makeshift morgue in a nearby warehouse, their boots crunching in the crust. You turn your head, a lump forming in your throat. The great white hurricane has taken its toll in the quiet corners of the city. The elderly who couldn't keep their fires lit, the homeless who found no shelter, the brave who tried to do their duty and were swallowed by the drifts. You begin the long trek back to your own quarters. The sky is turning a deep, bruised indigo, and the first stars are beginning to prick through the thinning clouds. They look cold, distant, icy points of light that offer no comfort. Your own house feels like a sanctuary, however cold it may be. You have managed to save a small pile of coal, and tonight, you allow yourself a slightly larger fire. The orange light flickers against the walls, dancing with the shadows. You think about the ice bridge one last time before you sleep. It is a symbol of this entire experience, a fragile, dangerous connection built out of the very thing that tried to tear the world apart. You realize that tomorrow, the sun might actually break through. The barometer is finally starting to rise. The great white hurricane is moving out to sea, leaving behind a city that is broken, buried, and forever changed. You close your eyes, the warmth of the stove finally reaching your toes, and you listen to the silence. It is no longer the silence of the void. It is the silence of a city catching its breath, preparing for the long, wet, difficult task of coming back to life. Wednesday, March 14th. You wake to a sound you haven't heard in days. A steady, rhythmic drip, drip, drip. It is the sound of the city's frozen heart beginning to soften. You look at the window, and for the first time, there is a streak of clear glass where the ice has surrendered to a pale, watery sun. The light that spills into your room is different now. It isn't the flat, oppressive gray of the storm, but a bright, blinding glare reflected off a billion melting crystals. The air, while still cold enough to bite, has lost its murderous edge. It carries a new scent, the smell of wet stone, damp wool, and the underlying, earthy tang of the river. The great white hurricane has passed, but as you look out at the white wilderness, you realize that the disappearance of the snow may be as treacherous as its arrival. You step outside, and the transformation is startling. The hard, marble-like crust of yesterday has turned into a treacherous, honeycombed slush. Every step is a gamble. Your boot might hold on the surface for a moment, only to plunge through into a hidden pocket of freezing slush. The great dig has accelerated into a frenzy. The city has authorized the use of every available man, and you see a literal army of laborers, their faces flushed and sweating despite the cold, heaving massive shovels of snow into the center of the streets. They are building mountains in the middle of Broadway, peaks of gray, soot-stained slush that tower higher than the street lamps. The soundscape has shifted from the roar of the wind to a chaotic symphony of human effort. There is the clink of thousands of shovels, the shouting of foremen, and the splashing of water as the gutters begin to overflow. You find yourself near City Hall, where the bustle is most intense. Telegrams are finally trickling in from the outside world, bringing news that is both a relief and a horror. You hear of trains found in the upstate wilderness, their passengers miraculously alive after days of huddling together for warmth. But you also hear of the White Death in the rural counties, farmers found frozen in their barns, and entire villages cut off from the world, their supplies exhausted. New York was the center of the storm, but its reach was vast, a frozen claw that stretched from the Chesapeake to the Maine woods. You walk toward the waterfront again, drawn by the fate of the ice bridge. The magic of yesterday has vanished. The rising sun and the shifting tides have turned the solid causeway into a graveyard of shifting flows. The black water of the East River is visible again, churning between the ice pans like a dark, hungry animal. You see a ferry boat, the first of its kind, tentatively pushing its iron prow into the slush. It groans as it grinds against the ice, a sound like a giant's teeth being crushed. The ice bridge walkers are gone, replaced by a few desperate sailors trying to clear the piers. The connection between the cities is once again a matter of steam and steel, but the river still carries the remnants of the freeze, ghostly, jagged shapes that drift out toward the Atlantic. The city is beginning to reveal what it has hidden for 3 days. As the drifts recede, the casualties are found. You pass a street corner where a small crowd is gathered in silence. Emerging from the melting white is the shape of a horse, frozen in mid-stride, its head bowed toward the ground it could never reach. Further down the block, a patrolman is helping to lift a dark shape from a doorway, a man who sought shelter in the night and never woke up. The melancholy of the storyteller's tone is no longer a mood. It is the atmosphere of the city. For every story of survival and bravery, There is a story of a life snuffed out in the dark, a reminder that for all our gaslights and telegraphs, we are still at the mercy of the ancient cold. You find a small cafe that has managed to secure a shipment of coal and flour. The windows are no longer frosted, but they are streaked with the grime of the melting city. You sit at a small wooden table, watching the world go by through the distorted glass. People are moving with a strange, frantic energy. They are no longer hiding. They are reclaiming their territory. You see a group of businessmen in top hats, their trousers soaked to the knees, leaping over puddles that are growing into small lakes. You see women in long skates, pinned up to avoid the mud, navigating the trenches with a grim determination. The New York spirit, that relentless, unsentimental drive to keep moving, has returned with a vengeance. But the city is a mess. The white of the great white hurricane is now a filthy, oily black. The soot from a million chimneys has settled into the snow, creating a layer of grime that sticks to everything. The air is thick with the smell of wet soot and horse manure, a pungent reminder of the city's true nature. You realize that the beauty of the storm was a lie, a mask of purity that covered a world of grit and struggle. Now that the mask is slipping, the reality is overwhelming. The sensory detail of this day is the texture of the slush, heavy, cold, and inescapable. It clings to your boots, it splashes your coat, and it fills the air with a damp chill that seems to go deeper than the dry cold of the storm. As the afternoon progresses, the thaw takes on a more dangerous character. The sewers and culverts, long ago frozen solid or clogged with ice, cannot handle the volume of the melt. You see water beginning to pool in the lower wards, flooding the basements of the tenements. You watch as people frantically carry their meager belongings up to the higher floors, their faces etched with a new kind of fear. The hurricane may be over, but the flood is just beginning. In the narrow alleys of the 5 Points, the water is already 6 inches deep, a cold, black tide that carries the refuse of the city on its surface. You decide to walk uptown, toward the more affluent districts. Here, the Great Dig is more organized, but no less arduous. The mansions of Fifth Avenue are emerging from their white shrouds, their marble steps slick with ice. You see servants in livery, their faces grim, working alongside hired laborers to clear the grand entrances. The disparity of the city is once again on display. While the poor are fighting the rising water in their basements, the wealthy are concerned with the state of their carriage paths. Yet, even here, there is a sense of humility. The great houses, for all their stone and iron, were just as isolated as the tenements during the height of the gale. The storm was a great leveler, a temporary suspension of the social order. You stop by a telegraph office that has finally restored a single, stuttering line to Philadelphia. The crowd outside is massive, a sea of anxious faces. You hear a clerk shouting out names, his voice cracking with exhaustion. People are weeping, some with relief, some with grief as the news of lost loved ones finally arrives. You realize that the silence of the storm was not just a lack of sound, it was a lack of connection. Now that the lines are being repaired, the emotional weight of the disaster is being felt in full. The whispers of the deep are the stories being told through the wires. Stories of ships lost at sea, of families separated by the snow, of the sheer, terrifying power of the weather. As the sun begins to set, casting long, orange shadows across the black-stained mountains of snow, you find yourself back in your own neighborhood. The drip, drip, drip has slowed as the temperature drops toward freezing again. But the damage is done. The streets are a labyrinth of ice and water, a landscape that is neither land nor sea. You climb your stairs, your legs aching with a fatigue that goes beyond the physical. It is an emotional exhaustion, the result of living through a moment where the world simply stopped. You sit in your room, listening to the city outside. The silence is gone, replaced by the sounds of a city trying to fix itself. You hear the rumble of the first wagons, the shouts of the workers, and the distant, reassuring whistle of a steam engine. But the sleepy historian in you knows that this is not just a recovery. It is a reckoning. The Great Blizzard of 1888 has exposed the vulnerabilities of the modern world. It has shown that our invincible cities are only as strong as the weather allows. You look at the small patch of clear glass on your window, and you see the stars again. They look different tonight, less like distant points of ice, and more like silent witnesses to the struggle below. You realize that for years to come, people will ask, "Where were you when the world froze?" And you will tell them of the silence, the ice bridge, and the way the city turned from white to black. You will tell them of the courage of strangers and the indifference of the wind. But mostly, you will tell them of the drip, 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 the sound of the world coming back, one freezing drop at a time. You close your eyes, the dampness of your clothes finally drying by the heat of the stove, and you drift into a sleep that is no longer haunted by the roar of the gale, but by the memory of a city that, for 3 days, forgot how to be anything but a group of souls huddled together against the deck. Thursday morning brings a sky that is almost cruelly blue, a sharp, biting azure that makes the remaining white of the drifts ache against the eyes. The air is still, but it is a busy stillness. You wake to the sound of a distant, metallic rhythmic pounding, the sound of the New York Central Railroad crews hammering the ice from the switches. It is the sound of the machine age reclaiming its territory. If the last few days were defined by the primal power of the elements, today is defined by the grit of the engineer and the labour. You feel a strange sense of loss as the primeval silence of the snow is shattered by the returning industrial roar. But as you look at your empty coal scuttle, you know that the iron resurrection is the only thing that will save the city from a lingering, freezing death. You step out into a world that is now a battlefield of mud and ice. The Great Dig has reached its peak. Thousands of men are now employed in a desperate race against the temperature, which threatens to plunge again tonight. You see the L tracks overhead, where crews are working with steam hoses to melt the frozen incrustations from the iron pillars. Huge clouds of white vapor billow into the cold air, creating a surreal, foggy landscape where ghosts of iron and steam dance above the streets. You watch as the first locomotive in days tentatively creeps across the 3rd Avenue line, its wheels slipping on the wet rails, sparking like a dying firefly. It moves at a walking pace, a cautious return to the sky, its whistle sounding thin and triumphant against the backdrop of the city's ruins. But as the snow recedes, it reveals the true cost of the Great White Hurricane to the city's nervous system. You find yourself standing at the corner of Broadway and Liberty Street, and the sight above you is staggering. The telegraph and telephone wires, which once formed a dense, humming canopy over the city, have been utterly decimated. They hang in frozen, tangled nests, draped across the cornices of buildings like the webs of a giant, frost-stricken spider. The weight of the ice was simply too much for the wooden poles to bear. You see dozens of them snap like toothpicks, their splintered remains jutting out of the dainty slush. It is a moment of profound realization for the Victorian mind. The invisible threads that connected the world are fragile, after all. The ghostly wires that carried the commerce of the nation are silent, and the city feels strangely disconnected, like a man who has lost his memory. You see the linemen at work, men of incredible bravery who are climbing the remaining poles or balancing on the icy roofs. They are working with bare hands, despite the cold, twisting the copper wires back together. They are the unsung heroes of this recovery, the menders of the city's broken thoughts. You watch one man, silhouetted against that sharp blue sky, his breath a constant plume of white, as he reaches out to bridge a gap in the line. There is a spark, a tiny, blue flash of electricity, and for a moment, You feel the pulse of the city jump. Somewhere, a stop ticker begins to click again. Somewhere, a message of "I am safe" begins its journey across the wires. The streets below are a chaos of horse-drawn activity. Now that the main arteries have been trenched, the wagons have returned with a vengeance. You see the heavy drays of the coal companies, their horses straining against the weight of the black diamonds that the city so desperately needs. The teamsters are shouting, their voices hoarse, as they navigate the narrow canyons of snow. You see the milk wagons, the bread carts, and the funeral carriages, all of them jostling for space in the slush. The sound is a cacophony of grinding wheels, splashing water, and the rhythmic thud of hooves. It is the sound of New York's metabolism returning to its frantic, normal rate. You walk toward the Grand Central Depot, and the scene there is one of pure, focused energy. The Iron Horse is no longer a ghost. It is Titan reborn. Dozens of locomotives are lined up, the boilers huffing and hissing, the smokestacks belching thick, black clouds that stain the pristine blue of the sky. They are the rescue party for a starving metropolis. You see the snow plows, massive, wedge-shaped iron structures mounted on the front of the engines, covered in the scars of the battle they have just fought in the hills of Westchester. They are encrusted with frozen mud and broken branches, testament to the miles of 30-foot drifts they have smashed through to reach the city. The passengers disembarking from the first trains look like refugees from another world. They are soot-covered, their faces haggard from days of sitting in cold carriages, yet they step onto the platform with a sense of reverence. They tell stories of the wilderness just 20 miles north, of houses buried to the chimneys, of trains disappearing into white voids, and of the incredible kindness of farmers who shared their last scraps of salted pork with hundreds of stranded travelers. You realize that the blizzard wasn't just a New York event. It was a regional trauma that has forged 1,000 individual legends. As you wander back toward the residential wards, you notice a new sensory detail, the sound of the gutter rivers. The melt is now so rapid that the streets have become a network of rushing streams. The water is a cold, dark gray, carrying with it a bizarre collection of the city's detritus, discarded hats, broken umbrellas, bits of shipping crates, and frozen refuse. You see children building miniature dams and bridges in these temporary rivers, oblivious to the fact that this water is the very lifeblood of the vanishing storm. The smell has changed again. It is now the smell of wet earth and ancient dust, as the moisture reaches parts of the city that haven't seen water in months. You find yourself in front of a newsstand that has finally received a fresh shipment of the New York Herald. The headlines are massive, printed in a bold, black font that seems to scream from the page. The White Death. City recovering from the ice. Hundreds perish in the gale. You buy a copy, the paper feeling crisp and cold in your hands. You read about the death of Roscoe Conkling, the powerful politician who collapsed after trying to walk through the drifts of Union Square. You read about the ice bridge heroics and the tragedy of the L train passengers. The news is a mosaic of human experience, a way for the city to finally process what has happened to it. The sleepy historian in you notes that this is how history is made, not in the event itself, but in the telling of it, in the transition from the lived experience to the printed word. By mid-afternoon, the temperature begins to hover at the freezing point, creating a world of rime and glaze. Every surface that was wet an hour ago is now becoming encased in a thin, treacherous skin of clear ice. The trees in the parks, which were just beginning to shed their snow, are now being shellacked in crystal. They look like glass sculptures, their branches clicking together with a sound like breaking china. It is a moment of fragile, dangerous beauty. You watch a horse slip on a patch of black ice, its legs splaying out as the driver frantically tries to keep the wagon upright. The great white hurricane is leaving its final, icy signature on the city. You return to your quarters, but you do not go inside immediately. You stand on your stoop, watching the sun dip behind the tenements of the west side. The light is a deep, fiery orange, reflecting off the ice-covered wires and the remaining mountains of snow. For a moment, the city is bathed in a golden glow that hides the grime and the soot. It looks like a city of glass and gold, a vision of the future rising out of the ruins of the frost. You think about the resilience of this place, the way it was brought to its knees by a few days of wind and snow, and the way it is already standing back up, dusting itself off, and reaching for the telegraph key. Tonight, the city will not be silent. You can hear the distant rumble of the trains, the shouting of the workers, and the low, constant hum of a million people beginning to talk again. The ghostly wires are coming back to life, and with them, the connection to the world. You go inside and light your lamp, the flame steady and bright. You have survived the white wool. You have seen the world freeze and melt, and as you sit at your desk to record these thoughts, you realize that the greatest sensory detail of all is the warmth, the simple, miraculous warmth of a room where the wind no longer reaches, and the knowledge that tomorrow, the city will be New York once again. But you also know that things have changed. The city leaders are already talking about moving the wires underground, about building a subway where the snow cannot reach, and about the need for a more robust infrastructure. The blizzard of 1888 was a teacher, and its lesson was one of humility and the need for progress. You listen to the tick-tick-tick of your own clock, a sound that finally matches the heartbeat of the city once more. The white hurricane is a memory now, a story to be told to grandchildren. But the ice remains in the shadows, waiting for the next time the sky decides to remind the world who is truly in charge. Friday, March 15th, arrives with a damp, heavy warmth that feels almost tropical compared to the Arctic iron of the previous days. The thermometer has climbed well above the freezing mark, and the city is no longer being sculpted by the wind. It is being dissolved by the thaw. You wake to a world that sounds like a waterfall. Every roof is a fountain, every gutter a rushing river, and the air is thick with a heavy, gray mist that smells of wet wool, ancient dust, and the deep, underlying scent of the Atlantic. This is the stage of the great white hurricane that the history books often gloss over, the slow, messy, and revealing process of unearthing a buried civilization. It is a time of archaeology, where the receding snow begins to give up the secrets it has kept under its white shroud for nearly a week. You step out into a landscape that has turned from a white wilderness into a gray-brown quagmire. The magnificent drifts that once reached the second stories are now shrinking, their surfaces pockmarked by the rain and blackened by the relentless fallout of coal soot. As the snow pulls back, like a tide going out, it reveals the wreckage of the storm in agonizing detail. You walk along a street in the Lower East Side, and you see the first ghosts emerging. A handcat, its wooden wheels shattered by the weight of the ice, sits slumped in the middle of the road. A pile of discarded newspapers from the 10th of March, frozen into a solid block, slowly begins to peel apart. Its headlines about a spring gala now a cruel joke. The sensory experience of this day is defined by the mud. It is not merely dirt and water. It is a 19th century New York mud, a thick, viscous paste composed of soot, horse manure, salt, and the pulverized remains of a week's worth of city life. It coats everything. It splashes up the sides of the brownstones. It ruins the hems of the ladies' dresses, and it makes every step a heavy, sucking chore. You see the horses, those tireless engines of the city, struggling to pull wagons through a foot of this black mire. Their coats are matted, their breathing labored, their eyes reflecting the exhaustion of a city that has been fighting for its life. The sleepy historian in you notes that while the snow was a tragedy of the air, The thaw is a tragedy of the earth. You find yourself drawn to the parks, Union Square, Madison Square, where the drifts were deepest. Hey, the archaeology is most poignant. You see the remains of the snow shelters people built during the height of the gale. Little hollows in the drifts were messengers or the homeless huddled for warmth. Now, they are just collapsing ribs of ice, littered with the debris of survival. A tattered blanket, a broken bottle, a single leather glove. You see the statues of the city's heroes emerging from their white prisons. Abraham Lincoln, George Washington. They look bedraggled, their bronze faces streaked with the grime of the storm, as if they, too, have been through an ordeal. The soundscape is a constant, wet slap slush of boots and hooves. The rhythmic clink of the shovels continues, but the energy has changed. The workers are no longer fighting a monster. They are cleaning up after one. You see gangs of men with high-pressure water hoses, a new technology, trying to wash the mud from the major thoroughfares into the struggling system. The steam from the warm water hits the cold air, creating a low-lying fog that clings to the ground, making the city look like a scene from a dream or a nightmare. People move through this fog like shadows, their faces blurred, their voices sounding muffled and distant. But the most striking revelation of the thaw is the humanity revealed in the wreckage. You pass a storefront where the owner is finally able to open his door. He is sweeping out a pile of slush and mud, but he stops when he finds a small, frozen bird on his doorstep, a sparrow that couldn't find shelter. He picks it up with a surprising gentleness and sets it on a dry ledge. It is a tiny moment of empathy in a city that usually has no time for it. You see neighbors who haven't spoken in years standing on their stoops, comparing notes on their coal supplies and their frozen pipes. The great white hurricane has broken the social ice as much as it has frozen the river. In the late afternoon, you wander toward the L stations. The trains are running more frequently now, but they move with a heavy, cautious rumble. The iron structures are still dripping with melting ice, creating a constant rain beneath the tracks that forces pedestrians to walk with their umbrellas up. Even when the sky is clay, you watch as a train pulls into the station, its wooden cars streaked with mud. The passengers who step off are no longer the frightened refugees of Tuesday. They are the workers, the clerks, and the shopgirls returning to the city's daily grind. There is a sense of grim perseverance in their movements, a New York resolve to get back to business, no matter how deep the mud. However, the whispers of the deep are still being heard. You pass a maritime exchange where a chalkboard lists the names of ships that haven't been heard from since the 12th. The list is long. The Great White Hurricane was a maritime disaster as much as a terrestrial one, and as the telegraph lines to the coast are repaired, the news from the lighthouses and the ports begins to trickle in. You hear of schooners driven onto the shoals of New Jersey, of pilot boats lost in the fog, and of the incredible bravery of the life-saving crews who rode into the teeth of the gale to rescue sailors from the rigging of sinking ships. The sea, it seems, does not give up its secrets as easily as the snow. The smell of the city on this Friday is perhaps its most honest state. The cold had a way of sanitizing the world, of freezing the odors of a crowded metropolis. Now, with the warmth and the moisture, everything is being released at once. It is a pungent, overwhelming brew, the smell of wet horse, of damp coal smoke, of the salt from the harbor, and the metallic tang of the iron rails. It is the smell of a living thing that has been held underwater and is finally gasping for air. It is not pleasant, but it is real. It is the sensory detail of a city that is no longer a legend, but a working, breathing, and very dirty machine. You decide to visit a cemetery on the outskirts of the city, or as close as you can get. The gates are still partially blocked by drifts, but you can see the headstones peeking out from the white. It is a silent city within the city. You think about the people who died during the storm, the White Death victims, and how they are currently being held in temporary vaults because the ground is still too frozen for the spade. It is a sobering thought. Even in death, the blizzard is still holding its grip on the city, refusing to allow the finality of a grave. The melancholy of the historian returns as you watch a lone funeral procession, the black carriage struggling through the mud, the mourners huddled together against the damp chill. As evening falls, the mist turns into a light, drizzling rain. It is a cleaning rain, one that helps to wash the remaining soot from the air, but it also adds to the rising waters. You find a small tavern, not the one from the first night, but a busier place near the docks. Inside, the air is thick with the steam of drying coats. The talk is all about the great blizzard. Men are exaggerating their stories, turning 3-foot drifts into 30-foot mountains, and claiming they walked across the East River on a single sheet of ice. It is the birth of the folklore. You listen to them with a dry wit, knowing that in 50 years, this storm will be a myth, a once-in-a-lifetime event that will grow with every telling. But you also hear the talk of the future. You hear the engineers talking about the pneumatic transit and the electric light. They are saying that this must never happen again. They want to bury the wires, bury the trains, and build a city that is immune to the sky. You realize that the 1888 blizzard is the death rattle of the old, exposed New York and the birth pangs of the modern, subterranean metropolis. The sleepy historian and you seize the irony. The very event that proved our fragility is the one that will drive us to build even greater, more complex systems of control. You walk back to your room, your boots heavy with the mud of a dozen wards. The archaeology of the day has left you tired. You have seen the city's bones, its secrets, and its grit. You climb the stairs, the sound of the dripping water still echoing in the hallway. You sit by your window and look out at the dark, misty street. The mountains of snow are smaller now, looking like melting ghosts in the gaslight. The world is wet, dark, and difficult, but it is moving. The iron resurrection is complete. The ghostly wires are humming, and the city is preparing for a Saturday that will be just another day of work. You close your eyes. The sound of the rain against the glass a soft, rhythmic lullaby. The great white hurricane is fading into the past, leaving behind a trail of mud and memory. You think about the silence of the first morning, and you compare it to the chaos of today. Both are New York. Both are part of the story. And as you drift into sleep, you realize that the most important thing isn't the height of the snow or the speed of the wind. It is the fact that tomorrow, the sun will rise on a city that refused to stay buried. Saturday, March 16th, and the air carries a crisp, renewed clarity. The temperature has dipped just enough to firm the ground without freezing the spirit, and for the first time in an eternity, the sun feels like a permanent fixture rather than a fleeting guest. You wake to a city that is no longer in a state of emergency, but in a state of profound reflection. The great white hurricane has moved from the headlines into the heart of the city's identity. As you look out your window, the world is still scarred. The mountains of snow in the middle of the street are now jagged, soot-stained monuments. But the rhythm of life has achieved its full, frantic tempo once more. This is the final act of our journey, the moment when the sensory reality of the blizzard begins to crystallize into the legends of the old New York that we will tell for the next century. You step out for one final walk through this altered metropolis. The mud of yesterday is beginning to settle, and the archaeology of the drifts is being cleared away by an army of sweepers and carts. The city is a hive of repair. You see the glaziers replacing the thousands of windows shattered by the gale. The sound of glass being cut is a sharp, musical punctuation to the morning air. You see the masons inspecting the brickwork of the tenements, and the carpenters mending the wooden docks that were crushed by the ice. There is a sense of collective housekeeping, a washing away of the trauma. But as you walk, You realize that while the snow is vanishing, the city it leaves behind is not the same one that existed on that quiet Saturday night a week ago. You find yourself standing in Union Square, the very heart of the city's social life. A week ago, this was a white abyss where men like Roscoe Conkling fought for their lives. Today, it is a bustling forum once again. You see people gathered in small groups, and the air is thick with the sound of the story. Everyone has won. You hear a man describing how he lived for 3 days on nothing but crackers and melted snow. You hear a woman telling of their ice bridge and how her husband brought home a loaf of bread that cost him a week's wages. These stories are the new currency of New York. They are being woven into the fabric of the city's folklore, a shared ordeal that has created a rare moment of communal memory in a place that usually lives only for the next hour. The sensory landscape of this final day is one of afterglow. The light has a peculiar quality, a soft, golden tint that seems to hit the remaining ice and turn it into pearls. The smell of the city is dominated by the scent of fresh-turned earth and the clean, metallic tang of the harbor. The sound is the most telling. It is the sound of the future. You hear the constant, distant thrum of the telegraph wires, now fully restored and humming with the commerce of a nation that is trying to make up for lost time. You hear the roar of the L trains, no longer tentative, but aggressive and proud. The iron resurrection is complete, and the city is asserting its dominance over the elements with a renewed, almost defiant energy. You walk down to the Battery, the southernmost tip of the island, where the land meets the sea. The harbor is clear of the lully ice now, the dark blue waters of the Atlantic sparkling in the sunlight. You see the great steamships coming in, their hulls scarred by the ice but their flags flying high. They bring with them the news of the world, and they take away the stories of the storm. You stand there, feeling the salt spray on your face, and you think about the great white hurricane as a ghost. It is a presence that will haunt this coastline for generations. It showed the city its own mortality, and in doing so, it sparked a revolution of infrastructure that will redefine the urban world. The sleepy historian in you looks toward the future. You know that within a few years, the forest of telegraph poles that once darkened the sky will be gone, their wires safely buried beneath the cobblestones where the wind cannot reach them. You know that the L trains, for all their majesty, will soon be joined by the subway, a world beneath the world, a city of steel and light that will never know the touch of the snow. The blizzard of 1888 was the catalyst for the modern New York, the moment when the city realized it had outgrown its Victorian skin and needed a skeleton of iron and electricity that could withstand the whims of the sky. As the sun begins its final descent of our journey, casting long, violet shadows across the park, you find a quiet bench. You watch the sunset, a spectacular display of orange and crimson that seems to set the windows of the skyscrapers on fire. It is a sunset that marks the end of an era. The old New York of gaslights and horse-drawn dreams has been tested by the ice and found wanting. The city of tomorrow is already being born in the minds of the engineers and the dreams of the survivors. You think about the sensory details that will stay with you long after the snow has melted into the sea. The silence of the first morning, the blue light of the snow tunnels, the smell of the coal smoke in the frozen air, the taste of the salt spray on the ice bridge, and the sound of a million people breathing together in the dark. These are not just facts for a history book. They are the textures of a life lived through a catastrophe. They are the things that make the sleepy historian lean in close and whisper, "I was there. I remember." The lights of the city begin to flicker on. They are brighter now, or perhaps they just seem so because you have known the true dark. The gas lamps glow with a steady, reassuring light, and the first electric arcs of the new street lighting system crackle with a blue-white energy that seems to mop the coming night. You rise from your bench, your joints a little stiff from the lingering cold, and you begin the walk home. You pass a newsboy, his voice echoing in the twilight, shouting about the latest plans for the underground. You smile to yourself, a dry, world-weary smile. The city is already moving on. It is already forgetting the fear, even as it builds the monuments to its survival. When you reach your door, you look back one last time at the avenue. The mountains of snow are mere slush now, disappearing into the dark gutters. The great white hurricane is gone, leaving behind only the dampness in the air and the stories in the taverns. You enter your house, the warmth of the whole a final, welcome embrace. You climb the stairs, the wood creaking with a familiar, comforting sound. You sit at your desk and pick up your pen, the ink dark and ready. You write the final words of your chronicle. New York is no longer an island of individuals, but a city of survivors. We have seen the white wall, and we have come through to the other side. The ice may return, but we will be ready. We will build deeper. We will reach higher, and we will never again be silenced by the snow. You set the pen down. The candle on your desk flickers in a stray breeze, the flame dancing like a tiny, defiant soul. You close your eyes, the world of 1888 fading into the mists of history. The sleepy historian has finished his tale. The 240 minutes have passed, and the frozen city is now a dream of the past, a landscape of ice and memory that we carry with us into the warmth of the present. Sleep now, and dream of a world where the only white you see is the soft clouds of a spring morning, and the only sound you hear is the heartbeat of a city that never truly sleeps, no matter how hard the wind may blow.